And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Hello, I'm National Weather Service Meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska Aviation Weather Outlook on this Friday, November 8th, 2024. And we start off with the flight category map here and what we are expecting. There is going to be an area of low pressure passing just south of the eastern Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula this Friday, and then the low is going to come up just southeast of Kodiak Island before heading more east-southeastward for the latter portion of the weekend. There will be some gale force winds around the system, so that's going to create areas of turbulence from the western Gulf, the entrance of Cook Inlet down along areas of the into the peninsula and into the eastern Aleutians as we go through the day Saturday. As far as IFR conditions, we see some IFR along the coastal mountains here in the north central, northeastern Gulf Coast, as well as up here in the interior, near and east of Fairbanks, and then also an area, the Bering Strait, surrounding St. Lawrence Island. By the time we get Saturday afternoon, still the IFR lingering along the northern Gulf coastal mountains up toward Chilkoot and White Pass, around Yakutat, Prince William Sound, and the eastern Kenai. Further north, a bit of an expansion of IFR conditions expected along the Beaufort Sea coast from Kaktovik to Utqiagvik. And then on Sunday, we find some remnant IFR conditions, mainly the eastern Kenai, western portion of Prince William Sound. Generally, VFR conditions across the mainland. There will be some colder air, weak high pressure building with colder air in this region late this weekend and early next week. A number of normal cold spots in here will be below zero. MVFR conditions along areas of the North Slope and Arctic coast, and then some pockets of IFR there, the Bering Strait, west side of the Seward Peninsula, and just along the outer lower Yukon coast there. But as we get into Sunday afternoon, again, with weak high pressure cold air in place here over the central, east central interior, VFR conditions will be prevalent throughout the Alaska Range, south central, northern panhandle, with some MVFR conditions, southern panhandle, north slope, along the eastern Arctic coast, with maybe some IFR well offshore, though, of places like Wainwright and Utqiagvik. So the pass conditions on Saturday, Anaktuvik Pass, the east central Brooks Range, VFR conditions there, as will Adigan Pass on Saturday as we drop southward. There's going to be a ribbon of MVFR conditions that linger along the west arm of the Alaska Range. Lake Clark and Merrill should generally be MVFR. Rainy Pass may start out with some MVFR conditions early Saturday, giving way to VFR conditions in the afternoon. And then certainly as we round out through the central and eastern Alaska Range Saturday, we expect VFR conditions, Windy Pass, Isabel and Mentasta Passes, also down across the Copper River Basin, Tanita Pass, VFR. And then as we get down along the northwestern Gulf Coast there around Prince William Sound, we do expect at least the eastern half of Portage Pass to be MVFR, becoming IFR, especially along that east entrance, whereas the west entrance will start out VFR and maybe become MVFR as we go through Saturday afternoon and evening. And then looking out in the northern panhandle at Chilkoot and White, MVFR conditions becoming IFR as we go through Saturday. And freezing levels at the surface running down along the southwest coast, along the northern Gulf Coast into the inner channels of the panhandle. And freezing levels aloft. There's no really warm air to report because we just don't have any really strong low pressure systems with the strong fronts that tend to pull that warmer air northward. So right now, most of the freezing levels are at or below 2,000 feet across the state, with the exception of the outer southwestern portion of the panhandle, Sitka down toward Klawak and Craig, and a pocket of above 4,000 foot freezing levels there, but you have to go way down along the British Columbia coast to Vancouver Island. Now, we are going to have, with this low pressure coming up south of the Alaska Peninsula and going just southeast of Kodiak Island, there is going to be breezy conditions along the Gulf Coast and still some precipitation happening there Saturday. Generally, in those precipitation producing clouds, you get above 4,000 or 5,000 feet along the northeastern Gulf Coast into the Panhandle. You could encounter icing. Also further south around Kodiak Island, cold wind-driven rain. But as you get up in those precipitation producing clouds, there could be some moderate icing above 4,000 feet, parts of the Alaska Peninsula, including Kodiak Island, and in through the lower southwestern portion of the Gulf. At 30,000 feet, jet stream level winds, we find a little bit of a trough here associated. This is the upper level reflection of that low pressure that's going to be south of the Alaska Peninsula. But winds across northern and central parts of the mainland relatively light, and generally just the south and then curving west-northwest flow over the Panhandle, 75 to 90 knots. And then behind me at 30,000 feet, there is an anticyclonically curved, what we call a jet core with maximum winds of 120 knots, but that's south-southwest of the Aleutians. And as we bring things down to 700 millibars or 9,000 feet, we start to see better the low pressure system, the mid-level circulation here just south of the Alaska Peninsula. Some winds coming across Kodiak Island at 9,000 feet up toward Lake Iliamna, the Katmai area, Shelikof Strait, could be as 50, 55 knots. Strongest winds, though, are southeast, well southeast of the low center, upwards of 50 to 70 knots. They're just south of the Gulf out over the North Pacific. And then as we bring it down to 3,000 feet, we have that low circulation just south of Kodiak Island. Pretty good band of strong winds along this frontal system, anywhere from 45 to as high as 75 knots there in the North Pacific, but of more concern back toward and southeast of Kodiak Island, we find winds 50 to 60 knots, 50 knot plus winds there, Shelikof Strait. And as the low circulation wraps around over the eastern half of the Aleutians, the lower end of the Alaska Peninsula, we find the winds out of the north on the order of, say, 45 to 55 knots. So with this kind of setup, we do expect some moderate to even isolated severe turbulence along areas of the Alaska Peninsula into the far eastern Aleutians, and especially there as we get into Saturday afternoon along the east side of Kodiak Island and points southwestward. And generally, this turbulence surfaced to 4,000 feet, also up there toward the entrance of Cook Inlet. And then we bring it down along the eastern central Aleutians, surface to 3,000 feet. And then there may be some enhanced polar easterlies here coming in off the west end of the North Slope and Brooks Range. There could be some isolated moderate turbulence, especially, say, between Point Lay and Cape Lisburne, surface to 3,000 feet on Saturday.